Welcome to episode 4 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men the Animated Series weekly recap podcast. I'm Rod. You can follow me on Instagram at RodKimRocks.
And I'm JC. You can follow me as The John Carl on pretty much everything. TheJohnCarle, because nobody ever gets my name right. Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single episode of the original 1992 X-Men the Animated Series in their original intended script order, building up to the release of X-Men 97, which is coming to Disney Plus next year.
Some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that came out 3 decades ago, so there's going to be spoilers. If you don't want it spoiled, pause the podcast, go watch the episode, come back. We'll do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes in case you're just watching this in real time for the first time, which, good for you. Better late than never, I guess. We're currently not sponsored or affiliated with Disney or Disney Plus, but we're still open to free stuff.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we'll also upload the audio podcast there. YouTube, great audio platform. And make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast service. Finally, we record these episodes in batches right now. That may change in the future, but right now we're doing them in groups. So if we're reacting to some of the news, it may not be the most timely, and you may have heard about it up to 3 to 4 weeks ago. I'm not sorry because there's a pandemic happening.
Now onto the show. Today we're going to be talking about episode 5, Captive Hearts, which initially when it started, I didn't think I remembered this episode.
Really?
That changed as the episode went along.
I was going to say, because this is one of the very, I don't want to call it seminal episodes, but it is one that is often referenced and is actually based off a 2-part story from the comics.
You know what? Just because, so any kids listening that were born after the year 2000, there were times where you just missed TV shows and then they wouldn't come back on, or they'd be a long time. So I wonder if this was one I just missed the opening of.
You only saw the second half, maybe?
Or something, or something, or maybe I was arguing with my brother for the first half. Anything's open, because it wasn't like I could just stream it or pause it or rewind or whatever. So initially I was like, I don't think I remember this episode, and I got excited because I was like, is this a new episode? That wasn't a spoiler, wasn't it?
Wasn't it? So the episode starts off in the Danger Room. We see Storm in a little bit of a leadership role in the Danger Room. They have this incredibly awkward moment where somebody actually says, remember what happened to Morph in there. And it's like, oh, wow, there's motivation, and then there's like a gut punch, and that was definitely the gut punch kind of motivation.
And it was really great to see the Danger Room in action because we got a tease in the very first episode.
Yep.
And then this one we actually get to kind of see like more fleshed out like simulation.
Yeah, we start to see that it's a combination of various death traps that are constantly going, and Professor reminding people that they need to work together. Something I thought that was really interesting in this shot, at the time, there wasn't the ability to go back and make quick changes. You were getting footage from overseas, and it wasn't a digital file. People were literally sending reels and stuff to each other. Jean's chest was actually miscolored. So instead of it being black or blue in the center with the orange on the sides, it was just like the same color, like tan across all of it. And then we actually see a little bit of a payoff from Storm's claustrophobia that we mentioned in our previous episode. And you see a young version of Storm in what looks like something is collapsing, giving us a reason of why was she freaking out in the previous episode as that wall was collapsing. But one thing that stood out to me, she was discolored. And I mean, her skin color actually did not line up either.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if it's because I'm watching it on Disney Plus and that's not a problem across the board.
Yeah.
But she was definitely not the same skin tone that she is.
Like the child version of
version
Yeah,
of
I
Storm.
noticed that too.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, was that just like a weird like film reel thing or something? Or was this we don't have time to fix it?
I think it was we don't have time to fix it because whoever wrote Kid Storm must not have wrote Storm. They probably said Kid.
Yeah.
And then we get a little bit of a jump over Wolverine, who's not in a full karate gi, but he has karate pants on, working out in his room. And then we get the moment that inspired the name of the podcast in this episode, where you have this interaction with Jean and Wolverine, and she's telling him not to push himself because she knows he's still injured from the attack from Sabretooth, which, holy crap, this Wolverine does not heal anywhere near as fast as comic book Wolverine. Let's just throw that out there right now.
Is this supposed to be the next next day? Or,
even if it's the next day.
Because for some reason in my head, maybe it's because at the time when these were being broadcast, it was almost weekly.
Yeah, it was weekly.
So in my head, it was just like, okay, this is like a week later. So I was like, why is he still bandaged up? Isn't he Wolverine?
Yeah. But Wolverine overextends himself and ends up reeling in pain a little bit. And you have this awkward moment between Jean and Wolverine. And she's like, oh, I've got to go. Cyclops is waiting for me. And then you have the most pitiful Wolverine response of the entire series where he goes, so am I.
I noticed that. I was like, I don't remember that moment of weakness with Wolverine as a kid. Maybe I just didn't pick up on it, you know?
Well, apparently you didn't watch the first half of this episode as we've gone through.
You know, that's a pretty good point. Maybe I just didn't see it.
Maybe you had not, you're like, what is John talking about when he's suggesting the name of the podcast is Cyclops is waiting for me?
Actually, I did not remember this quote. It just sounded like something that would be in the show. You know what's interesting? That line, even if I didn't recognize it as a kid, now Cyclops is waiting for me. Like, is that the first hint we got that Wolverine had a thing for Jean?
If it was done in a previous episode, it was so subtle. This was the first time where it was obvious.
Because we had Rogue in the previous episode saying to Cyclops, like, don't worry, I won't tell Jean. They're like, okay, so they're a thing.
Yeah.
And then now we're in this thing where Jean's like, okay, Cyclops, I gotta go. My boyfriend or whatever, my partner is waiting for me. He's just like very clear, like, it's like the equivalent of like asking someone out and they're like, oh, I've got a boyfriend.
Yep. Pretty much. And it's like, but I could be your boyfriend. Right. And it's like, oh, well, sorry, bro.
And then is this where the Morlocks start?
So we cut to Cyclops and Jean walking out of the theater. They went with Phantom of the Opera, which, to their credit, in 1993, if you were going to go into New York City for a date, that probably would have still been on Broadway. I say that with total lack of research to confirm it.
It ran for a long time.
It ran for a long time.
Yeah.
It was like that in Cats.
Yeah. I don't understand Cats, but
we don't have to get into Cats on this one. So,
but no, that makes sense. If you're going, especially if you're a Boy Scout like Scott, that makes sense. Like, I'm going to take this woman on date. This is what date look like.
He's not a robot, Rob. A Boy Scout and a robot are different. And here's how you know they're different. As they're leaving, Jean could tell there's something bothering Scott, and it's the guilt from what has happened so far. He's experiencing guilt for the decisions he's made where members of the team have gotten hurt and such, you know. So a robot wouldn't have that emotion. He's beating himself up probably too hard for it, but the emotion is still there. And as they're leaving, that's where we see the first of the Morlocks. Little tiny green guy. Looks like he is stealing fruit. The character is Leech. He says his name a little bit later in the episode. And he's using telekinesis to grab the fruit. Telekinesis is not Leech's power.
I was wondering about that. The moment was confusing because it was almost like, was that a Jean moment or something? Or?
So Leech, even in this show, his power is he's able to shut down other mutants' powers.
Yes, but they show a little bit later.
Right. And that's why it's like, okay, that's still actively a part of his power set. And in the X-Men movie that has the Juggernaut, that's why Kitty Pryde doesn't get killed because the charge, even though he's not a mutant. So, and in the comics, that is his whole thing. That's why he's called Leech. He literally leeches the power off of people. But unlike Rogue, he doesn't need to make physical contact with them, and he doesn't absorb the power to take it on himself. He just removes it from the equation, essentially. When a few people see that Leech is trying to steal the fruit, they decide to chase him. Jean and Cyclops do what they do. They run down into the subway, and you see a confrontation between this group of humans as well as a bunch of who we would find out are the Morlocks. And there's a bunch of them there. They are not all named. Did a little bit of digging on them. You have Annalee, who is the little old lady. You have Sunder, who is the big, jacked, ogre-looking guy. I don't think you saw his power yet, but you have Ape, and Ape is able to physically, like, shapeshift. He has a little bit of, like, a wider, broader jaw. You have the guy with the flat-top hair with the eye patch. His name is Erg, which is just a really weird name. You have a few others that are going to show up later. You have Mask, Tommy, Plague, Glowworm, you have Scaleface. These are all like ones that are kind of deep cuts in some regards. And then you have the one that I'm actually not going to say his name because it is rather offensive in modern time. They did not say it in the episode, but he is the one who basically makes the black goo that creates the wall in the sewer. And he's one of the characters that at some point in X-Men comics has been killed. And even with all of the resurrection that happens in comic books, he has not been brought back yet.
Oh, he's a Marvel Song of the South.
I mean,
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yep. So I just showed it to Rod. And again, if you want to look it up, you can look it up, but I don't feel comfortable saying that because
At least they had enough forethought to not like audibly say it.
Yep.
In anything. I want to know the history on Tommy. She was like paper or something, like, and morphing. When she turned around, she was literally paper thin.
Yeah, so Tommy, for those who don't know, is one that is unnamed in the show. I had to do a little bit of digging online to find her. She turns sideways and she has like pastel colors to her. So there's lots of white and then some pastel pink, blue, and yellow. And I think that's one of the things about the Morlocks is because there's just this whole group of them that cannot pass as regular humans. Mm-hmm. The exception being Annalie. Annalie definitely could have because she was just a little old lady. Yeah. But she just has this weird power and she can say things and whatever she keeps repeating, people will listen to.
It's so interesting because this dichotomy of like what we were talking about with the X-Men being in the previous episodes, like they're not quite a team yet. Morlocks, very heavily established like teamwork.
Oh, yeah.
Like, very like, it's almost like knocking dominoes over.
Yeah. The one thing that stood out to me from this scene more than anything else, the animation team did not know what a subway train from New York City looked like. Because you can look back at any movie that has taken place in the New York subway of the last 40 years and probably at least another 10 years prior to that, they all look the same. It's just a matter of how much graffiti is on the shitty ones in the 1980s.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was not a US, definitely not a New York City subway train.
Yeah, yeah. It was pretty sanitized.
Yeah.
Like, is this what Canadians think America's like? Because all the voice actors are from Canada.
Yeah, that's psychic call goes out from Jean to Professor Xavier, basically being like, we're in trouble. There's not a firm where we are location, but Professor X is able to know that there's a problem and have a relative idea of where they are. This is also where two incredible things happen in the episode. One, you get the meme image where Wolverine is laying on his bed with a framed photo. And here's the funniest thing about the framed photo to me. It's not a framed photo of Jean.
Yeah.
It is a framed photo of Jean and Scott together. Why does he have that photo?
And he's in his full uniform.
That doesn't even bother me.
This is an added level of like, just, it's kind of like, you know, like when you get in your comfortable place or something.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Because it's not even like, because there have been times where he's in uniform, but he has the mask off. He has the mask on.
Yeah. That meme was how they announced the X-Men 97 series.
It is.
Go for the team for being aware of the internet.
It was also a recent re-release. I believe it was Mezco. I could be wrong on the toy company. Okay. But they made the toy in its Wolverine and the box is him on the bed holding the thing. So
that's awesome.
And they're apparently doing a whole line of characters from this series. But yeah, the toy is him in meme position.
That's
and such.
Amazing. I love when you listen to the fans, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's out of character. I guess it's meant to be like jarring. Like it's like, oh, he's actually got feelings. You look at this like grown man with like 20 ab muscles and he's just like, oh, and his, like you said, like touching a picture of Jean and Scott. Maybe he just wanted to be part of Triad. They weren't open to the conversation.
I mean, here's the thing. One, it was the 90s, so Triads definitely weren't a part of the conversation.
I mean, they're already in a secret school.
Yeah,
so
it's true. And then when you look at modern comics, there is some sort of thruple-esque relationship that's going on in the current version. Yeah. So it's not unheard of. Don't think that was the intent of that scene in the show.
In 1992 children's show.
Yeah, exactly. So this episode is just for us filled with memes. One being the name of our show, two being the most famous meme to come out of the show, and three being Gambit in a Speedo.
I had forgotten about that even after rewatching it. So you just mentioned it.
Because you see Rogue in, a traditional bathing suit. And it's not like banana hammock, but he's just in a Speedo. He is in short shorts.
He's fully aware of his sexual appeal.
Yeah, and that brings you back to comics from that age, because this is around the time of the Jim Lee era of comics, and they did a couple issues into that. It was like the X-Men or Marvel swimsuit special, and
I didn't remember this.
Yeah, it was a comic in that era, and it was like everybody out of costume and in bathing suits, and obviously like it was really cheesecakey in lots of respects to the women.
Yeah.
But Gambit was wearing like a Speedo in that one too.
Oh.
And most other people like Scott is wearing like board shorts shorts and like the typical Boy Scout shit. But it was like Gambit is like, I am a Speedo bro.
I don't know if it was just like left to interpretation because animation and like animated and drawn things didn't have that much detail, but I remember him having like a mullet pigtail situation.
I think it was like a rat tail or something like that. Yeah, I remember
it was definitely like crew cut on the sides.
Yes.
And like hair come out the top, and then the rat tail's like, what is this happening right now?
And that makes it even funnier that in the first episode, which we discussed, he goes to the mall in full X gear, but he doesn't like live in that stuff because he obviously went into a pool. So it's like he's not unheard of to walk around without whatever the weird black thing that surrounds his head is.
I thought it was interesting too. I know that they had Rogue in her swimsuit because it's, she's supposed to be sexy and everything, but it's like for a woman who can like kill someone by touching them, bold pool night,
I mean,
it's hard to swim in like full body gear.
Yeah, and I mean, she usually wears like the bomber jacket and stuff like that. And I would assume that if you're in the pool with Rogue, you're not going to automatically be like, let's do chicken fights because her legs are going to be on your shoulders and she's going to absorb you because of her thighs. Like that seems like a dangerous route to take.
It's like Zoolander or like gasoline fight.
Rogue in a chicken fight is the mutant equivalent of the gasoline fight.
There you go.
Yeah. So Professor X basically says, we need to go save them, gathers everybody, it's gung-ho, everybody's all for it. We see Scott down in the sewers. We find out that Callisto has decided that Cyclops needs to be her mate.
I was going to say, my note was like, Callisto is thirsty.
Yeah. And she's not taking no for an answer. The thing that I thought was really funny, and again, liberties, it's an alternate universe, but Cyclops says that his power is fueled by sunlight.
I had a question about that. Has that been a thing before?
If it has, it's not consistent. I have not heard that mentioned in so long that I can't even remember where it is in the comics. And that could be a classic era thing that they've retconned out, but I don't remember that being a thing, at least in the modern era.
It kind of flagged to me as something that like if you're writing and you don't have like, decades of knowledge or whatever these characters, you're like laser beams for eyes. Sun sounds right? Because that is the thing with Superman.
That is absolutely the thing with Superman, yeah.
So maybe that was just kind of like Eric and Julia, if you listen to this later, sorry if I'm being offensive. But like, I don't know. Like maybe was that part of the thinking? It was like, well, that must be it. Or they're like however many like feet underground. So that's the thing. But like, I thought that was interesting because I heard in the current times with the MCU, I've been hearing all these like fan theories of how they're going to introduce X-Men to the MCU. Someone had mentioned like, what if it has something to do with solar power and like how the sun is something that's sent by the Celestials, the power of the things and stuff. This is for the 12 people that saw Eternals. They kind of show like,
I feel like if there's anybody who's listening to an X-Men animated series podcast, we have a higher than average person likelihood that they eventually have seen Eternals.
So the 14 people that saw Eternals.
There you go.
They introduced this thing of the Celestial, I guess spoilers for Eternals for some reason, but they introduced the Celestials and how like, the grand plan is like these planets almost exist to birth additional like future Celestials.
It's not an almost, that's literally what the point is.
So like, I forget how connected, but basically it was like, what if the sun is something that's like actually placed by a Celestial to fuel the births of other Celestials and stuff? And what if that's how like mutants come into the MCU? What a deep cut if that ends up being anywhere near the truth to this thing about Cyclops' powers. I don't think it is.
I was going to say, I think it's radiation.
But but that's the only reason I don't think it ever flagged for me that he said that before until after watching Eternals and hearing those fan theories.
See, I definitely didn't connect it to Eternals, but it just, I think it's one of those things that I probably read 2 X-Men comics a week. Rod has seen my kitchen table, which is covered in comic books right now. And usually there's still 17 X-Men books that are out. So I only buy 2 of them a week. And that is not a thing for Cyclops. The group goes down. This episode still, by the way, has no Beast in it. This is another episode in a row that Beast isn't present.
Because he's still in prison.
He's in prison right now. Yeah. Or holding or whatever. But it was also something that Eric Lewald talked about in the book where they literally thought it out in advance of a order of rotation to give people different moments for their characters and purposely would leave people out in certain episodes. Like Gambit wasn't in the previous episode with Magneto and all that.
Real quick, before the other guys show up, I think Cyclops is like, where's Jean?
Yep.
And then Callisto like drops Jean down from a rope on the ceiling. So 2 questions about that. I know we have this thing about like people just aren't looking up. She was literally like 2 feet above his head. And he's like,
dude had just been knocked out, Rod.
Was he laying on the ground though looking up?
Shut up, Rod.
Okay, and then second question. As soon as she just dropped down on the rope, she uses her telekinesis to escape. Either Jean has just become conscious, or it's just, I'm guessing it's just plot device. But really interesting that like it's an action that she just could have done. But mostly the thing where she was hanging from the ceiling in front of Scott.
See, I think it was she hit the ground so hard that's when she decided to, I don't know. So our team that goes down into the sewers, by the way, Professor X doesn't know exactly where they are. They literally go down the same subway stop. So he knew exactly where they were.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. And in like the deep recesses of like under New York.
But you have Wolverine, you have Gambit, you have Rogue, and you have Storm who go down there. There's a moment where I believe it's Gambit who tries to get Wolverine to not push Storm. And Wolverine is obviously an advocate of tough love. So he goes, let her ask herself. And I thought that was really interesting because he doesn't want to coddle Storm. And I think knowing what we've known about the character for this long, she's not the kind of person who wants to be coddled. So I actually thought that was a really great moment for those two, even if they weren't directly interacting with each other.
You could tell they have history together.
Yeah. So they go down, they start, revealing where people are. Wolverine encounters Jean first, and as he's trying to rescue her, Jean is brainwashed. Annalee makes him think that he has scorpions all over him. It's just a really funny scene because it's a preamble to the bees from Wicker Man for me.
Oh.
It's like, you are covered in scorpions. I'm covered in scorpions.
I was like looking at that old lady and just being like, man, she could potentially be the most powerful person on Earth. Holy crap.
She's the most powerful. It's like between her, Jean, Magneto, and Professor X. Mm-hmm. As of right now in the show, are the four most powerful mutants on the planet to me. Because,
she fooled Jean, which was
she tricked Jean.
Yeah. Yep. And just personal side note, so cringy seeing Jean act like a...
The little girl vibe.
Oh my God. It was so hard to watch.
Yep. We see Cyclops, or we think is Cyclops, and he's knocked out. And Wolverine, the smell of Wolverine is brought up again in this episode. He says, I forgot the exact phrasing, but he's basically like, you don't smell like motor oil or something.
Oh, I think he just says he doesn't smell like Morlocks.
Is it Morlocks?
It's funny because the tone of his voice, it came across as like an offensive term.
Yeah. It's like... It's like, that's dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he pulls out his claw, acts like he's going to stab Cyclops. We see that it's Ape, who I alluded to earlier. And then the fight kicks in. So at that point, fight breaks out. We get the theme music from the show playing in the background. Gives a great vibe to it and everything like that. Also really great from a timing perspective because it was like, okay, if they only have a 45-second intro song, it's going to be a 45-second fight.
Yeah. And I remember it finishing on like the
sting.
The sting. But also like, this is for the music nerds out there. You can hear the song without the sound effects, without the Foley. Because if you watch on my YouTube video with Ron Wasserman, he talks about how the bell wasn't in there and like the lightning strikes and stuff the bell was in the song later, but like the lightning strike was added by sound effects later. It was an interesting thing, even though it's in the background, you hear the song in almost kind of pure form.
There's different Foley on top of it, but it's not the visual Foley from the intro.
Yeah. That you were like, is this part of the music or is it not?
Then we get an interaction with Gambit and the Morlock Plague, and that one's an interesting one because in the comics, the Plague scenario is a much, much bigger deal, but that's actually the origin of one of the plagues.
Interesting. Also, like the Morlocks, if it wasn't already like kind of apparent, for me, it was one of the first introductions as a kid, not in history class, of kind of like classism, because, obviously everybody's a mutant, but like there's these mutants that can kind of be covert almost, with the exception obviously of like Beast and Nightcrawler and all that stuff. They're like in this kind of like house on the hill, almost literally, they're in a mansion. And then we have these others, with the exception of the old lady, that are so like physically different than Homo sapiens. They're literally hiding in the basement, or even if it's not a physical difference, it's more of like I don't know, maybe there's some like backstory of like how they were brought up in like a lower like financial class or something. You definitely didn't want the Morlocks to like win over the X-Men, but I felt like you still kind of felt something for them because you're like, they're just trying to survive.
You felt bad for him. We see Wolverine has the opportunity to leave Cyclops behind, chooses not to. He would rather be sad than see Jean sad for that reason.
Mm-hmm. And they kind of had that bonding moment at the end of the previous episode.
No. Then we see the duel, also takes place in the comics, very differently in the comic.
The lightsaber battle?
The lightsaber battle where Storm steps up as a leader because she was the leader of that field team. So Storm, Wolverine, Gambit, and Rogue. She was considered the leader going into it. And basically it's, I challenge you so you don't try to get retribution on me. And it was essentially for the respect of your tribe was her phrasing. And then it was lightsabers.
Somebody called it out. They're like, are you crazy? I remember thinking when I was watching it, I was like, well, No, she's not crazy. She can control like the weather and stuff. But then they established a world like no powers.
Right.
And I was like, okay, now you're crazy.
Yeah, now you're crazy. But also, I don't know why the lightsabers lit up, because they were holding the lit up parts of the lightsaber. So it wasn't Darth Maul rules, which obviously didn't exist yet. But the double side, it lit up and it didn't do anything where it was lit up because they were physically holding on the lit up part, not the center.
Maybe I missed it, but I don't know where they came from. They just get tossed to
They just got tossed to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same place Sabretooth came from in the courtroom. Interdimensional portals.
So they go back and forth. Storm comes out on top, and she has the option where she could have killed Callisto. She decides not to. And she gives this like rousing speech of like, you no longer need to be down here. And it kind of alludes to your classism and such of you can join us and blah, blah, blah. The Morlocks are like, we can't come to the surface. They're like, we don't have this ability or privilege that you do. Like, if we go up there, we're going to be ridiculed.
You might be all right with us being up there, but there's a whole world that isn't. This is a really interesting commentary, which has to be on purpose, you know?
Maybe Annalee is just so old looking that she's worried she's going to suffer to ageism.
There you go.
I still don't know why Annalee. I think it's because Annalee in the comics has such a close relationship to Leech, where she's like a parental figure for him. That's probably why she won't go. She absolutely can pass as a little old lady in New York City.
Or maybe she had some trauma from like whenever her powers like
a manifestation,
like something traumatic. Like I feel like Rogue in a different circumstance could have been part of the Morlocks too, after her whole experience with her boyfriend that she described. It was like she could just been traumatized and be like, I'm gonna go in the sewers for the rest of my life.
And we will talk about that in a future episode.
So this is the episode where the meme of Scott and Jean making out in the background while Wolverine's like in the foreground, like left out.
And it's just awkward deadpan from his face. This episode is just filled with memes. Is this has to be the most memed episode of the show?
I guess we'll find out. I was genuinely surprised. Like I said, I didn't remember watching it until maybe at least a third of the way in. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait, this. I also don't remember the Morlocks being introduced this early. I would not be surprised if I just missed this episode the week it came out and then I saw it later on a rerun.
And then the thing that stands out for me, without going too into the details, is there is a later episode featuring the Morlocks around Christmas. That is apparently one of the later season episodes that I swear I saw that almost as much as the first episode of the series.
Oh, probably because they reran it like every holiday season.
They must have reran it on like a weekly basis.
But that makes sense if I missed it and saw a rerun, because there isn't very much in this episode that I can think of that makes it chronologically essential in this like order. Like I feel like you could have watched this one several episodes or a season later and it might not necessarily like seem totally out of place, right?
No, I think it has to feel out of place because this is the one where Wolverine kind of like pisses off for a bit.
Well, I guess as a kid, like as a kid, it's like, okay, so we don't see Beast and all this stuff, but he doesn't have to be in prison. It's just kind of it's just a own little standalone story. So it is serialized in the sense of like there's things that are through lines. But like Storm having the claustrophobic moment, they mentioned Morph and everything. Maybe also it was because the first like 4 episodes are basically continuations of each other.
That's true. This is the first one that didn't end in a to be continued. And then the end of the episode, everybody is kind of in a celebratory mood. They see that Wolverine has basically abandoned his room, and there is the picture of Jean and Cyclops ripped in half with the claw mark in between the two of them. And again, I still don't know why the only picture he has of Jean to lust over is the picture of Jean and Cyclops together.
Or like not at least one he hadn't modified yet, or he hadn't like folded it over so it's just Jean or something.
Right, like that would have been what we would do in modern storytelling. Is he has the picture of the two of them for, again, whatever reason, but it's like he folded it in half and it's framed or so.
You know, here, like a little headcanon, right? So they had Wolverine and Cyclops had this bonding moment at the end of the last episode when Storm almost sacrificed herself. And stuff. So now Wolverine's like into him too. He's like, you know what? If I can't just have Jean, I'm all right. I'm really pushing for this.
You're really pushing for it right now. So a few notes from the writers on the show. They loved this episode because it showcased the claustrophobia, which is what they felt was a really interesting weakness for somebody who is so powerful. And I think it went to your point earlier of like, Storm can just like wave her fingers and like blow off walls and stuff like that. And it was like, for somebody so strong, claustrophobia is something that she internalizes and becomes really powerless because of.
And you're way more knowledgeable in the comic book side of things. Was this something that was like established before the animated series in the comics?
I don't remember the order. I do know that claustrophobia is a theme within Storm's canon, though.
Yeah, I know in the long the big picture it is, but I was like, whoever came up with it, whether it was the comic writers or the show writers and stuff, what a perfect weakness for someone.
It was something that was in character bio for Storm from the important stuff about her that was actually talked about in the book. Yeah,
because she because literally she had her power is basically open space, right? The Earth and things, and so the fact that it makes sense. If you're in an enclosed space, it's easy to think you don't have power, but as an outsider, you're like, oh yeah, you can just blow the walls off, right?
Yep.
But for her, because of her trauma, she's it's the opposite of what is usually her strength.
There were a few other really important things in this episode that the writers, Bob and Marty in particular, they wanted to use this as a way to set up a love triangle. They actually compared it to Rick saving Victor in Casablanca and losing, I think her name's Ilsa, the main female character.
Yeah.
One person decides to save the other, but because of that person then gets the girl and they don't. So it's kind of a bittersweet reward of you did the right thing. The other person is going to get your love interest because you saved them. And then the other thing that really stood out was the climactic battle for what was called a boys action television show was between two female characters.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wish we had kind of more accurate statistics of shows that were this old and stuff, because like you said, at the time it was very clear oh, this is marketed towards boys. But I feel now I have a lot of female peers that are oh, I watched that show growing up too. We love that, Yeah. Because it, like you said, it had a lot of girl power moments in it, between Storm and Rogue. And I think even in the very first episode, was the first battle we saw just Jubilee, Rogue, and Storm?
With Gambit. But But it was still 3/4. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it initiated with Storm and Rogue trying to save
Jubilee,
right?
Because they Rogue through the escalator thing, which is fucking horrifying. Because if you've seen the underside of an escalator, it's just Final Destination shit. And then the final thing to bring up, as mentioned earlier, this was inspired very heavily by Uncanny X-Men numbers 169 and 170. Few things changed in it. Angel was actually the one who was kidnapped to be with Callisto, not Cyclops in that one. The mutant who gets hit with the plague is Kitty Pryde. And then Storm and Callisto fight for the lead, similar, but instead of it being lightsabers, it's a knife fight. And it's super, super violent. Storm stabs Callisto, I believe, in the heart, where she doesn't die for whatever plot device, but it's violent. And that was actually a moment for Storm where she changed as a character. If you look at some of the legacy Storm outfits, she at one point starts donning a cutoff leather vest. She shaves her head into the mohawk and stuff like that. That came after this issue because she kind of took on a little bit of Callisto's persona.
I didn't realize that. I remember the different incarnations of Storm, which is actually my user avatar on Disney Plus. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, shocking.
It's kind of like a faux hawk kind of thing.
Oh no, this one was full mohawk version.
I remember that. But that makes so much sense that it was kind of to be part of the Morlocks and stuff. Wow.
Yeah, and I think because in this version she is not as active in the leadership role of the Morlocks as what she did in the comics, because in the end of the episode, she basically says, Callisto is leading in my stead. But yeah, that was the episode, I think. Anything else that stood out to you, Rod, before we wrap up?
Surprise, one more note about Storm.
I mean, it was a Storm episode, so that's pretty reasonable.
So all the stuff they showed about Storm in this episode, and then the things you mentioned about her being in the leather jacket and the mohawk and stuff, is one of the 5 million reasons I hated the X-Men movies. The one consistent thing with Storm, if nothing else, besides her power set, was that she was always powerful, in a position of power. Even if other people didn't put her there, she put herself there. And that was the exact opposite that Halle Berry's Storm did, both in the writing and her depiction.
Yeah.
If anybody who has any future decisions on X-Men Storm in the live action MCU universe and stuff, whatever happens with her in the future, just one of the core character tenets can't be saying something about frog exploding and lightning and stuff.
I love your optimism that by episode 4 of this podcast, you think we're going to have MCU decision makers listening to it. I appreciate that. So I'm the naysayer / negative one of the group, and Rod is hopeful. So
I'm just cautious. I've said dumb things about large properties this way many times, where someone who's had a say in it has, you know what, I'll just come out and say it. So there's times I work in music, I'm a songwriter. There's been times I've hated songs that I've charted, and I'll just say it on Facebook or Twitter. And then one of my friends who wrote the song is like, I tried my best. I'm like, oh, God damn it. Well, you know, you're still doing better than me because you charted. Rod still is not charted. So long story.
I think we can't go out on a higher note than that.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure to drop them in the comments for either the YouTube upload or the official Instagram post about this episode. If you liked what you heard, we'd appreciate your rating on a podcast app of your choosing. And still working on that catchphrase and outro.
Rod still has not charted, but damn it if he doesn't love Storm.
There you go. Don't fuck up Storm.